The story most people read was simple. Soldiers raided Bobi Wine's home, his wife was assaulted, and he went into hiding. Another African election, another crackdown, another opposition figure hunted by the state. But buried inside the details was something far stranger. The soldiers didn't ask neighbors where he was. They didn't bring arrest papers. They didn't even search the house like people looking for a man. They asked for passwords. They demanded access to devices. They stayed even after it became clear he wasn't there.
Same man held me by my hair, lifted me up. We have poles in the sitting room, and hit my head on the pole and slit my mouth. So when he hit me, he pulled me down and sat me down. Then he pushed my head and I went down, and they sat on me. I could feel 4 bodies seated on me. Then he said, "Will you give me the password?" I said again in Unyankore, "You have already done enough. You are not getting the password."
That's not how political arrests usually work. That's how systems behave when something doesn't match what they expected. It felt less like a raid and more like a malfunction, as if the operation had been triggered by something invisible. And once it started, it couldn't stop itself. So the real question isn't why Bobi Wine is in hiding. It's why a military raid began with a login request instead of a name. Let's find out. It didn't start with shouting. It didn't start with sirens. It didn't even start with people. It started with a device. Earlier that day, Bobi Wine wasn't home. He had already left. But his phone was still there, lying quietly inside the house like a forgotten object with no importance. At some point, his wife switched it on. Not to make calls, not to send messages, just to access something saved inside it. For a few minutes, the phone connected to the network. That was enough. Somewhere inside Uganda's telecom systems, a signal appeared. A familiar digital fingerprint. A device that had been silent suddenly came alive in a fixed location. To the system, that didn't look like a phone. It looked like a presence. And presence triggered movement. There was no waiting period, no confirmation process, no human verification. The response was immediate, mechanical, almost automatic. Military units were activated as if responding to an alarm rather than to intelligence. No one knocked on neighbors' doors. No one asked local police if they had seen Bobi Wine. No one double-checked. The system didn't care about uncertainty. It saw a signal and treated it as truth. By the time the soldiers arrived, the decision had already been made. The raid wasn't being planned anymore. It was being executed. That's why everything about their behavior felt wrong. They didn't come cautiously, like officers hunting a dangerous fugitive. They came confidently, like workers sent to retrieve something that was supposed to be there. They didn't secure the perimeter. They went straight inside. They didn't ask questions. They issued demands, because from their perspective, there was no mystery. The phone had told them the answer. In older crackdowns, someone betrays you. A driver talks. A neighbor leaks. A party insider switches sides. But here, no one spoke. No one warned. No one informed. The only thing that talked was a signal. That changes the entire logic of repression. It means the state doesn't need spies everywhere anymore. It doesn't need to infiltrate movements. It doesn't need loyalty from insiders. It just needs access to networks. Once it has that, people stop being hunted through relationships and start being hunted through infrastructure. You don't disappear because someone pointed at you. You disappear because your device exists. And the most dangerous part is that the system doesn't understand mistakes. To a human, a phone left behind is an error. To a network, it's confirmation. So when the soldiers arrived and Bobi Wine wasn't there, the system didn't register false alarm. It registered failure. Something was wrong with reality. And when systems fail, they don't stop. They apply more force, which is why the raid didn't end when the target wasn't found. It escalated, because the signal said he was there. And when reality didn't match the signal, the system didn't question itself. It started trying to rewrite reality instead. So if a phone signal can summon armed soldiers, and the system trusts data more than human presence, what happens when the data is wrong? and the system refuses to accept it? When the soldiers realized Bobi Wine wasn't in the house, something strange happened. They didn't leave. There was no retreat. No radio call saying the operation had failed. No shift into apology or confusion. Instead, the atmosphere changed. The mission didn't stop. It reprogrammed itself. At that moment, Bobi Wine stopped being the target. The house became the target. Rooms were no longer spaces. They were containers. Objects were no longer personal belongings. They were potential evidence. Every surface was treated like it might be hiding something the system expected to find. And then the focus shifted to the only thing still alive inside the operation: his wife. Not as a person, as a substitute interface. They didn't say, "Where is he?" They said, "Give us the password." That's a critical difference. It means they had already accepted that Bobi Wine might not be physically present, but they still believed something of his should be. His data, his access, his digital shadow. So the logic became simple. If the signal came from this house, and the man isn't here, then whatever makes him function must still be here, which means someone inside this house must be holding the keys. That's how Barbara was reframed. Not as a spouse, not as a civilian, not even as a witness. She was treated like a security breach. Her body became the obstacle between the system and the information it wanted. That's why the violence wasn't random. It wasn't emotional. It was mechanical. Pull the hair, force eye contact, restrict breathing, apply pressure, repeat demand. Not because they wanted to hurt her, but because pain is the fastest method of forced compliance when the goal is not confession, but access. They weren't trying to make her admit anything. They were trying to make her unlock something. Phones, accounts, devices, anything that could restore the connection the system believed had already been established. And this is where the story stops being about Uganda and starts being about a new form of control. In older political repression, families are punished to send messages. Here, families are used to solve technical problems. The raid failed to retrieve a human, so it tried to retrieve functionality instead. Think about that shift. It means the state no longer sees people primarily as political actors. It sees them as access points to networks it can't directly enter. If it can't reach you, it reaches the nearest person who might hold your credentials. And once that logic exists, privacy disappears completely. Not because of laws, not because of surveillance cameras, but because every relationship becomes a potential backdoor. Your partner is no longer just your partner. They are your weak link. Your parents are not just family. They are potential authentication devices, which explains why the soldiers didn't stop when Bobi Wine wasn't there. From their perspective, the operation hadn't failed. It had simply moved to the next available layer of access. So if modern repression no longer targets people but targets entry points into their digital lives, what exactly happens when the state finally gets inside the network it's trying so violently to reach? What the soldiers were really trying to reach wasn't Bobi Wine himself. It was everything around him. Because Bobi Wine doesn't operate like traditional politicians. There is no central office you can shut down, no headquarters you can raid and declare victory, no official chain of command that collapses if one person disappears. His movement is scattered. Messages move through private phones. Coordination happens in small encrypted groups. Decisions travel through voice notes, screenshots, backups, and burner devices. It's not an organization you can map on paper. It's a living network. And that's exactly why the system struggles with him. Old power systems are built to fight visible enemies. Parties, militias, institutions, structures you can label, register, monitor, and regulate. But Bobi Wine's influence doesn't sit in buildings. It lives in circulation, in forwarded clips, in Telegram groups, in TikTok edits, in music shared offline, in memes passed phone to phone, which makes him extremely difficult to shut down. You can arrest leaders, but you can't arrest momentum. You can block TV, but you can't block peer-to-peer communication. You can shut down the internet, but people already downloaded everything. So when the state hunts him, it's not chasing a man. It's chasing a pattern of movement it cannot see. That's why the raid felt so different from classic crackdowns. They weren't searching for weapons. They weren't searching for documents. They weren't even searching for him physically. They were searching for the invisible machinery that keeps his relevance alive. Which explains why passwords mattered more than addresses. They didn't need to know where Bobi Wine was sleeping. They needed to know how he was still functioning while being hunted, how messages were still spreading, how supporters were still coordinating, how content was still being released, how morale was still holding. In other words, they were trying to locate the control room of a decentralized movement. And that's a nightmare for any authoritarian system. Because if you can't locate the center, you can't destroy it. If you can't identify leadership, you can't decapitate it. If you can't isolate communication, you can't contain it. So the state does the only thing it knows how to do. It tries to force visibility. It attacks devices. It demands credentials. It pressures families. It interrogates anyone who might act as a gateway. Not because it wants information about Bobi Wine's ideas, but it wants technical access to the network that carries those ideas. That's why the violence felt so oddly precise. Not ideological, not emotional, not symbolic, just functional. Like technicians trying to break into a locked system using the nearest available tool. And when they fail, they don't stop believing the system exists. They assume it's just hidden deeper. So if the state cannot see a movement, cannot map it, cannot control it, and cannot shut it down through traditional force, what happens when it finally gives up on understanding and decides to rule through something else entirely? Let's pause for a second to say, big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. Normally, this is where the story changes tone. A government denies. A spokesperson appears. An investigation is announced. Someone is suspended, pending review. That's the ritual. Uganda skipped all of it. Instead of damage control, the head of the army went online and started talking like a man who had nothing to lose. He didn't say the raid didn't happen. He didn't say the reports were exaggerated. He didn't even use the language of law. He posted numbers. How many were arrested? How many were killed? How many are still being hunted? Not hidden in reports, not leaked to journalists. Broadcast publicly, on social media, as if announcing football scores. That single shift changed everything. Because the moment a state stops pretending to care about legality, it's telling you something important. It no longer feels threatened by exposure. This wasn't recklessness. It was confidence. The kind of confidence that only exists when a system believes it has already won. Won over the courts. Won over the media. Won over international pressure. Won over internal dissent. Which explains the tone. There was no defensive language. No moral framing. No effort to justify violence as necessary. The message wasn't about right or wrong. It was about capacity. We can do this. We are doing this. And nothing will happen to us. That's a different kind of power display. Earlier in the story, the system was desperate to access networks it couldn't see. Now suddenly it didn't care who was watching. Because once you realize outrage has no consequences, you stop managing reputation and start managing fear instead. And fear doesn't require explanation. It only requires repetition. Say the numbers often enough, and people internalize the message. Resistance is expensive. Survival is safer. This is the exact moment repression becomes structural, not enforced by secrecy, enforced by predictability. Everyone now knows what happens if you oppose, not because of rumors, because the state itself announces it, which is far more effective than censorship. Censorship creates doubt. Open intimidation creates discipline. You don't need to hide violence if the purpose of violence is to be seen. And that's what this was. Not a crackdown, a demonstration, a signal to everyone watching. The system does not need your belief. It only needs your compliance. And once a government reaches that psychological stage, it doesn't care about legitimacy anymore. It doesn't even care about being feared in secret. It wants fear to become normal, routine, expected, boring, something people build their lives around. Don't post this, don't say that, don't join this, don't share that. Not because the law forbids it, but because the consequences are already known, which is why the army chief didn't try to sound professional. He wasn't speaking as an official. He was speaking as a system announcing its final form. So if power no longer bothers to justify itself, and instead openly performs its ability to harm, what happens when fear becomes more reliable than law? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. At this point, it's tempting to think Bobi Wine became a target because he lost an election. That's not true. Lots of politicians lose elections. Most of them don't get hunted, tracked through telecom systems, or have their families turned into access points. Bobi Wine became a problem long before ballots were counted, because he didn't threaten the regime in the usual way. He didn't build an armed group. He didn't split the army. He didn't even try to take over state institutions. He built something far more dangerous. He built cultural relevance. He speaks in the same language as young people. Not speeches, but clips. Not press conferences, but short videos. Not official statements, but music, jokes, sarcasm, shared frustration. He doesn't feel like a politician. He feels like someone from the same world as his supporters. And that breaks the old political order. African strongman systems are built on distance. The leader is supposed to feel untouchable, mythical, surrounded by history, uniforms, titles, and medals. A figure above normal life. Bobi Wine collapses that distance. He feels accessible, human, familiar, which is exactly why the system can't control him. You can't isolate someone who doesn't rely on state platforms. You can't silence someone who doesn't need official media. You can't discredit someone whose legitimacy comes from shared experience. He doesn't need the regime to exist, and that is the ultimate threat. Old systems survive by forcing everyone to operate through them. Courts, broadcasters, parties, institutions. Bobi Wine operates outside the structure entirely. His power doesn't flow from the state, it flows around it, which means repression doesn't work the same way. Arresting him doesn't stop the movement. Blocking him doesn't remove his influence. Even hiding him doesn't erase him. Because what people follow isn't a leader. It's a symbol of a different future. One that doesn't look like military rule, doesn't speak in liberation-era language, doesn't worship old men with guns. That's why the state didn't try to negotiate. It didn't try to co-opt. It didn't even try to debate. It tried to disappear him. Not just physically, but socially. By cutting off his networks, by breaking his access points, by making anyone connected to him feel unsafe. The goal wasn't to defeat him, it was to make association with him too expensive. And that reveals the real fear. Not that Bobi Wine will win power, but he proves that power doesn't need them anymore, which is far worse for a system that survives on being unavoidable. So if a regime realizes it cannot control popularity, cannot absorb culture, and cannot contain relevance, what does it do when the only thing it still fully owns is fear? When you put everything together, the raid stops looking like an accident and starts looking like a trial run. Not a mistake, not panic, not even revenge. A test, the phone signal, the automatic deployment, the switch to family pressure, the public threats, the meaningless election, the obsession with networks instead of bodies. Each piece fits into a single pattern, a system learning how to rule without consent. Uganda didn't just try to crush one man. It tested a method where power no longer depends on persuasion, ideology, institutions, or legitimacy. Only on infrastructure. Who controls the telecoms? Who controls the data? Who controls access to devices? Who controls the consequences? Once you own those layers, you don't need loyalty anymore. You don't need belief. You don't even need people to like you. You just need them to stay connected. Because the moment people disconnect, politically, socially, digitally, they become unreachable. Unreachable people are dangerous. That's why this system isn't built to convince. It's built to map, track, pressure, and isolate. Not mass arrests. Targeted extraction, not propaganda. Network disruption, not ideology. Access control. What happened to Bobi Wine's house is what this future looks like when it leaks into real life. A state that doesn't need to argue. A government that doesn't need to justify. A military that doesn't need to hide. Just systems executing logic. If the signal appears, deploy force. If the target is missing, apply pressure. If resistance persists, escalate visibility. If outrage fades, normalize. No speech is required. And the most dangerous part is that this model is scalable. It doesn't require popular support. It doesn't require international approval. It doesn't even require stability. It only requires connectivity. As long as people use phones, as long as they rely on networks, as long as their lives pass through digital systems, power can reach them without ever meeting them. That's why this story feels unsettling in a way older crackdowns didn't. It's not about brutality. It's about design. A design where repression is no longer reactive. It's automated. No longer secret. It's normalized. No longer political. It's technical. And once control becomes technical, resistance becomes almost invisible. You don't know where the center is. You don't know who's watching. You don't know which signal will trigger what. You just learn to stay quiet. Which is the real goal? Not silence enforced by law. Silence produced by calculation. People don't stop speaking because they're banned. They stop because they understand the system now. So the final question this story leaves hanging is not about Uganda. It's this. When power no longer needs your belief, your vote, or even your obedience, only your connectivity, how do you resist a system that can reach you without ever asking who you are? Let us know in the comment section. Is Uganda doomed? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.